In April 2024, the British International Institute for Strategic Studies released an analysis saying that for Ukraine, the best-case scenario is a stalemate, and the worst case is their defense lines breaking. In the end, the war's outcome will probably depend on when Putin gets exhausted, or if someone shows up who can effectively soothe his mind. While Western aid doesn't guarantee Ukraine's victory, cutting off support would mean certain defeat. Eventually, when NATO membership comes up, all the Western support could become a debt that forces Zelensky to accept division. This would give Putin a convenient excuse for an exit strategy. The IMF has predicted that the war will end somewhere between late 2025 and mid-2026. But there was a huge wild card: Trump. He stepped in to negotiate a peace deal with Russia. Zelensky wanted NATO membership and U.S. troops stationed in Ukraine to guarantee safety from Russia. But Trump rejected both NATO membership and U.S. troop deployment in Ukraine. And in the peace negotiations, he showed signs of bypassing Ukraine and dealing one-on-one with Russia. He basically wanted to deal directly with them. When Zelensky protested about bypassing Ukraine as the directly involved party, Trump fired back that starting the war was wrong in the first place, that they should have made a deal with Russia long ago, and that the current situation was caused by Zelensky's inexperienced negotiation skills. Trump suggested surrendering the occupied territories to Russia and agreeing to peace talks. He said if Ukraine wanted U.S. protection, they'd have to give up 50% of their rare earth minerals. In other words, he proposed a business deal to Zelensky. On February 28, 2025, Trump and Zelensky publicly argued over Ukraine's peace negotiations during their summit at the White House. Zelensky left without any agreement being reached. If you look at the Ukrainian ambassador's expression, you can get a sense of the atmosphere at that diplomatic disaster. Trump's actions faced a lot of criticism. Phrases like surrendering to Russia's war crimes, not valuing alliances, and only caring about money started appearing everywhere. It was so bad that John Bolton, who served as national security advisor during Trump's first term, criticized Trump's plan to end the Ukraine war as being closer to surrender than anything else. Some people were really upset about this, namely America's allies, especially the EU, who strongly criticized it. As I mentioned in the previous video, the Ukraine war could spread to Northern Europe, and then to all of Europe. Their thinking is that if this case ends messily, when it's their turn someday, they'll face an equally messy situation. The EU Commission President, French President Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk all sent messages of support to Ukraine, saying, "You are never alone," and "We will continue to stand with you for a just and sustainable peace." Wouldn't it have been better if these guys had shown this support earlier? Taiwan was also in an uproar. The Ukraine-Russia situation isn't that different from the Taiwan-China situation. They had thought the U.S. would protect them, but seeing the current situation, they're worried that without paying some kind of friendship fee, they might be in serious trouble. When you think about it, doesn't the U.S. seem less like an alliance leader and more like a mercenary? Actually, Ukraine is the one shedding tears of blood here. During the Soviet Union era, Ukraine was a storage site for various weapons. When the Soviet Union collapsed and Ukraine became independent, strategic nuclear warheads, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and strategic bombers all became Ukraine's property. A newly born country suddenly gained enormous power. But power that doesn't match one's capacity tends to invite trouble. It was like giving a gun to a child, and various pressures started coming in. Russia, the original owner of the nuclear warheads, was growling. The U.S. was growling. The UK was growling too. It was total chaos. At that time, the U.S. was concerned about the possibility of a nuclear arms race among newly nuclear-armed countries. They thought it would be very dangerous if everyone had nuclear weapons. So for the U.S., it was important to make Russia the only nuclear power among the former Soviet republics. Wouldn't it be easier to keep an eye on just one country, rather than monitoring several at once? Ukraine, lacking both the technology to maintain nuclear warheads and the national strength to withstand pressure from surrounding countries, eventually signed the Budapest Memorandum with 5 countries, the US, Russia, UK, China, and France, in 1994. The agreement stated that in exchange for transferring nuclear warheads to Russia, Ukraine would receive recognition of its territorial integrity and sovereignty, plus economic compensation. Ukraine wanted security guarantees from nuclear powers. The reason they signed with 5 countries is because today's security can only be achieved through collective systems, not individual countries. Russia was also one of the signatories to the memorandum. However, with Russia's forced annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its full-scale invasion in 2022, these guarantees effectively became worthless. From Ukraine's perspective, if they had somehow managed to keep their nuclear weapons back, then instead of giving them up, they would never have been sidelined in peace negotiations due to lack of power. A deep regret they now carry. President Zelensky had previously discussed the possibility of providing nuclear weapons during his meeting with former U.S. President Biden. And in early 2025, in an interview with British journalist Piers Morgan, he also demanded the return of nuclear weapons to Ukraine for security guarantees if NATO membership was delayed. But the U.S. firmly rejected this. Despite voluntarily giving up their nuclear weapons, Ukraine has now found itself in a position where it can never become a nuclear power again. Moreover, when negotiations with Zelensky at the White House weren't going well, Trump announced the suspension of support for Ukraine on March 4, 2025. It's like he's saying, let's see how long you can hold out. In the last video, I mentioned that we should consider both sides of any situation, right? Trump's actions also have some justification. During the Biden administration, the U.S. definitely provided substantial support to Ukraine. In a capitalist society, it's only natural to expect something in return for your support. Where in the world would you get anything for free? While the U.S.-centered alliance is showing signs of instability, Russia is all smiles. If peace negotiations conclude in Russia's favor, Putin's stock will skyrocket again, and his path to lifelong rule will be wide open. So, why is Trump doing all this, even though he knows it will make Russia happy? While the U.S. remains the world's #1 country, it's undeniable that its status as the absolute global authority has fallen significantly compared to the past. For Trump, who has just taken office, he wants to achieve impressive accomplishments like being the brilliant negotiator who ended the Ukraine war, or advancing America through collecting tariffs from countries worldwide. These major achievements would allow him to wield substantial power throughout his presidency. Maybe he even wants to be president for a long time, like you-know-who. And what the U.S. is really worried about is China, which stands behind Russia. In 1979, the U.S. contained the Soviet Union by normalizing relations with China, which ultimately played a decisive role in the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991. This time, they're using Russia to check China, which is competing with the U.S. for hegemony. From Russia's perspective, this isn't bad either. As the war has dragged on, the Russian economy has been increasingly encroached upon by Chinese capital. The balance of power between the two has already collapsed. By making a deal with the U.S. here, Russia could rise again without depending on China and potentially regain equal footing with China. There's a reason why Putin mentioned achieving status as one of the world's 4 major powers in his 5.0 inauguration speech. If U.S. support stops, Ukraine can't hold out at all. It's not just about war supplies. If Starlink, which handles their communications, is cut off, it's like their eyes won't see, their ears won't hear, and their limbs will be severed. They'd be like a helpless punching bag that can't do anything. In the end, Zelensky will likely give in to America's demands. It's as if a massive stack of bills has suddenly arrived for someone who's been surviving on other people's money, like someone who's been playing a dangerous game of credit card shuffle. The conclusion of the Ukraine war suggests a great deal. The situations of the Baltic states I mentioned in the previous video, as well as Finland and Sweden, aren't that different from Ukraine's. And in Asia, Taiwan is in a similar position. How America acts will significantly influence how its allies set their policies. Serious questions have also been raised about NATO's continued existence. Peter Bajtor, Slovakia's former ambassador to NATO, said in a Wall Street Journal interview, "The moment one member country thinks other countries probably won't defend us, that's when the end of the alliance begins." Perhaps we might see the birth of a new European community that excludes America, not NATO or the EU. This way, the big money boss would be gone. But hey, they wouldn't need to worry about what America thinks anymore, right? The whole world has realized there's no such thing as goodwill without cost. Everyone is moving to protect themselves, either by increasing defense budgets or somehow preparing friendship fees in advance. With everyone bristling like hedgehogs, I don't think I'm the only one who feels the current flowing toward World War III. By the way, our country is also just in a ceasefire with North Korea. If war breaks out again, it won't simply be South Korea versus North Korea. That day should never come, but if it does, would we have the resources to pay a friendship fee? Ukraine at least has rare earth minerals that might tempt Trump, but we don't even have that. What are we supposed to do?
That's all for today's video. This series about the Ukraine war will be a 5-part series. Don't miss the other videos. Please like and subscribe to our channel.